Let me just respond briefly. A lot of these things are things that we've looked into that were cut out of a short talk. Let me start. Sorry. Let me start with the last one. So it's definitely true that one of the biggest puzzles that emerges from our results and paper is why aren't people doing this themselves? Why aren't they saving up a little bit of extra money and then investing it in these high return assets? And I think this just speaks to the literature that has shown how much difficulty people have saving. And I don't know if that's behavioral commitment problems that people have, or if it's inter-household, if people can't keep money around because someone will take it. And that's how I interpret also the difference in the fact that they don't need help with habit formation when the structure is there to help them save. But when they have to save on their own, they do need that extra help. That's how I put those things together, but it's hard for us to pinpoint. In terms of whether or not it makes sense for the MFI to do this, certainly we went in, hoping we could kind of convince the MFI that it would be profitable, and in theory it could be profitable for them to do this. Again, they could raise the interest rates, and we asked people how much they'd be willing to pay for different lengths of grace period. What we find when we try to put it all together into a model that incorporates adverse selection, as we can measure it in our survey, and thinks a little bit about moral hazard that might arise from a higher interest rate, it looks like the interest rate they would have to offer is somewhere around 30%, so not that much higher. So they say 22, and it would have to go up to 30. But it also looks like the adverse selection, based on what people say they're willing to pay, might be bad enough that that's why the market fails. So it might not be possible. Right now we're that's kind of our stance on it. Is that it looks like, based on a lot of imperfect data on who would select in to the contract, that the reason that the MFIs don't do this is because, in fact, they might not be able to charge the interest rate they would need to recover exactly what they lost. Which means maybe there is some role possibly for outside intervention or subsidies to maintain this. Since it's 1:30 and I know that a lot of people have to leave, I'm going to make note myself of the rest of the excellent points and allow anybody the chance to ask a question or two if they have one. Yeah.
Just two quick points. So one is, and I'm not as aware of the group lending literature, but one of the questions in my mind was, if they're taking this as a group, why can't they come to an agreement that one or two of the members use their share to do the immediate payback and let the other members of the group do the longer term investing, and then the next time they take the loan as a group, they switch? So again, it's sort of your question of why didn't they figure out another way to do the longer term investing on their own? Because you would think the group lending structure would give them a way to do that, but again, maybe they just completely think as individuals, and the group structure is just about the enforcement. The other, just to pick up on David's point as well, is that it would be interesting to see a histogram or some more information about this difference between the higher average and the variability, because you could have a higher average and greater variability, but still almost everybody's better off than the control group. Or is it that there are a lot of people who are worse off than the control group, and a lot of people that are a lot better off than the control group? And so it would be interesting to see, when does that variability, how many people does that throw below the control group, to really think about how bad the variability is from a social protection standpoint.
Yep. Great. Those are excellent points. One thing about, just to say quickly, the group structure, and David brought this up too, because this is an urban setting, these are urban microfinance clients, it actually looks a lot different than rural microfinance groups that do seem to work much more as joint liability groups, even when it's not explicit, because everyone knows everybody in the village. In these urban areas, a lot of people don't know their group members at all, and so the level of social contact is pretty low, even though they've been with those group members for a year. They're from different castes. There's a lot of heterogeneity within the group, and these groups are not, in general, they're not formed by. So usually someone knows one other person, so someone will bring someone into the group, but the groups are pieced together by the loan officers, and so I don't really think they act. I think coordination is very hard. Just in terms of how often they talk to each other. So we have a lot of measures of social contact, and social contact is pretty low. But I think that that's why they're not resolving the problem themselves. Yeah, you're right about. I think showing the distributions would help a lot, and that's something that we've done in more recent versions of the paper. One problem that I didn't make explicit is that the profits, as we measure them here, are bounded below by 0. Even when we calculate them ourselves, it's clearly, we clearly don't see the left tail of the distribution. And that makes it harder to kind of pick out the losers because, we got a lot of zeros and, I'm sure there are some negative profits, but they're just not, they're very hard to measure, even when you try to construct profit yourselves. And obviously, when you just ask the profit question, I don't know if we actually prompted people that they could say losses, but no one reports losses when you ask. I don't know if that's true in other people's work, but it's a problem with looking at the distribution. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Erica. Quick question. I'm wondering if you explored whether this grace period affects access to additional sources of credit in the future, if you asked anyone about their ability to get access to credit. I could think of these effects going either way, and I don't know if this is they have the monopoly on access to credit, but I'm sure there's other sources they might leverage.
Yeah, I think there's still a big gap in between microfinance clients' average income and what it would take to actually secure a bank from even the government bank branch. And so these people's businesses are still not big enough to have access to kind of non-microfinance loans. So we did look at, it doesn't change whether or not the likelihood that you continue to be a microfinance credit client with this bank, but that's probably because you have these defaulters who are dropping out, and then maybe you have lower dropout among the people who are non-defaulters. So I think there's some, on average, they're just as likely to take out the next loan. Loan size, I didn't look at.
From someone else in your
That's
family?
a good question. I should look. I don't know that offhand. I'm not sure that we've looked at that. That's a great question. But that could be one of the mechanisms that the results, the effects grow over time. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. I guess my question is related to heterogeneous treatment effects. So as you were talking, and also I think David kind of hinted on this, for example, risk aversion type of measures and time preference type of measures.
Yeah.
Do you have any of that? I saw you have something on willingness to take business risks, but I was wondering if you've looked at any interactions with your treatments in those terms.
So I should have kept that slide in. I just cut it this morning, last night. So we look at, we have a heterogeneity analysis now, and we look at risk aversion. So we measured risk aversion at baseline with these kind of survey questions where we have people choose between lotteries. And there's a significant negative interaction between, so people who are more risk averse respond more to this treatment. So people who are risk loving don't need a grace period to take on entrepreneurial risk. It's the risk averse individuals who respond most to the grace period, which is, I think, what one would predict. We also see evidence that, I'm trying to remember all the heterogeneity analysis. We try to identify individuals. There are certain fraction of individuals who are not taking out these loans for business purposes. And so we proxy that with whether you have chronically ill individuals in the household. If you're not, if you're taking out a loan because of, to some kind of consumption, like health, then you should not be responding to the grace period because you're not putting money into the business. And so we do find that same significant negative interaction on the coefficient for interaction between being assigned to the grace period and having chronically ill members in the household. So those people don't respond. There are other more interesting heterogeneity results. We do.
Only because there's literature suggesting the interaction between that and risk preferences. So I'm saying, I guess if you're kind of interacting that, you probably want to, well, I guess you have a randomized design, but still you may want to, look at that.
That's a good idea. I'll have to look at that. Sometimes I can't remember how well that was measured in the survey, but that's a good idea to look back at that.